Okay, well, thank you. A lot of work has gone into this paper, so I have some comments on the paper, but perhaps also on the project more generally as well. So start with a bit of shameless advertising. Not entirely shameless, because I'm going to be referring to these things. I've been involved in a wider project, and here are some publications from it. There's an interdisciplinary volume at Oxford University Press, and the Uchida-Nelson paper, which is the agglomeration measure that's been used in these projects, is actually published in that volume. The special issue of Urban Forum and the Paul Mukawaya's paper looking at colonial origins of urbanization in Uganda is in that special issue. And the special issue of Journal of Economic Geography, which Tony Venables and I did a few years, 4 or 5 years ago, and the Henderson-Wang paper that Derek referred to is in that special issue. I'll be referring to other papers in these publications. So, what does the paper do? Essentially, it presents various facts on Uganda and the transformation, and it includes, for example, the Uchida-Nelson agglomeration index. And the facts on agglomeration for Uganda, at least to my knowledge, I'm not a deep expert on Uganda, are in fact new, I believe, and they constitute, I think, genuine value added in this paper. Now, various other facts, somewhat more standard facts, are brought together in one place: the composition of output, population demographics, poverty and equality. And these facts are not new. They're basically taken from UBOS publication, directly from table to table, in fact. And they're fairly well known, so we know that. So I think the real value added in terms of facts, new facts, is the agglomeration index. So really the question to me is, what's the narrative here? It's essentially, at the moment, is a collection of facts. And what I understand from what other people are saying is that this is perhaps the midpoint of the process. I was evaluating it looking at it, assessing it as a completed piece of work, so maybe this is still to come. And maybe what I have to say then will be helpful in that. So what the paper really is missing is an attempt to use these facts to weave a story, to tell a story, to attempt a strong narrative, either testing the theory of transformation, assessing the policy proposal, etc. And I think that's what's needed really in this paper for it to live up to its full potential. So here are 3 suggested questions that the paper might ask. Which among the series of specific policy proposals are best for poverty reduction, taking into account the various transformation channels? That could be one very specific question that you could ask. And this is the Doris Thurlow paper actually does that quite well for Uganda and also for Ethiopia. I mean, the paper essentially takes three policy avenues that are under active discussion right now and puts the CGU model through its paces. So. But that's one suggestion for this paper. A second suggested question is the following: which of the many theories of transformation which are reviewed in the Doris Heddy paper that was presented at the start of this conference, or by Durkheim, for example, does the Uganda experience fit best? So I don't think this necessarily has to be econometric analysis. It can be a back and forth with the data in a more discursive tone. But I think having the structure of alternative theories against which to play these facts would be quite important in my view, because at the moment it's just a collection of facts, and that's it. So, for example, the issue of which of the, if you remember Stefan's presentation, whether in fact it's the Lewis closed economy, or is it the Lewis thing with an open economy, or is it the Harris-Madaro, the Delta, etc.? Which of these best described in your view? I think taking that as an objective, if one could take that in a broad discussion, or you could say, I'm going to test one of these theories right the way through. So I think this would also actually, an attempt to do that would reveal what other facts are needed, other than these ones that have been put together. For example, data on wages, on wage rates. Might be quite important in something, for example, testing the Lewis type assumption. So it will also reveal what new sources of data are needed. And the third suggestion, I've already touched on this in my own presentation, So here's what the paper has. The paper has facts on the evolution of poverty, distribution more generally. The paper has facts on transformation, according to the different definitions that have been used in this conference. So one question is, how much of the change in poverty can be accounted for by transformation, so to speak, or structural shift, defined according to one of the three ways or whatever that we've been talking about here. I think this can be done relatively straightforwardly for the rural-urban population shift using additively decomposable measures. This is what I was trying to get at in my own presentation. It's almost there. The paper is almost there for that. You could just do it, but do it in a more elaborate way. It's less straightforward to link the output transformation to poverty change, but it can still be done using decomposition mapping controls. It's not straightforward. You have to be careful and so on. It's certainly less straightforward than decomposition by population subgroups, which is the bullet above. Okay? But you can still do it. So that's suggestion. Those are my suggestions for asking a set of questions which will structure a narrative around which the facts can then be deployed, rather than just have the facts presented one after the other. As I said, many of those facts, other than the Uchida-Nelson agglomeration stuff, are already quite well known in the literature, so that's not a value-added contribution, a high value-added contribution. They're just putting those facts there. So I have two final suggestions for the project, which are relevant for this paper, but also I think more broadly. Firstly, I think it's to do with the data issues. In this conference, people have mentioned the data issues. Well, of course, there are problems and so on, but I'm going to carry on discussing the graphs as though the data was actually representing what I represent. And that we've seen that a number of times, I think. So I think there should of course be an acknowledgement that there are data issues. But I think what would be important and interesting is for authors to think through how sensitive the conclusions are to variations in that data. Okay? Suppose the urban definitions weren't what we thought they were, etc. Well, how far wrong would we go? And one exercise of that type is taken by David Satterthwaite in our OUP volume. The title tells you what it is. It's Urban Myths and Misuse of Data that Underpin Them. But it's quite a negative type paper. It's a critical type paper, but it says, you thought urbanization was this much. It could actually be this much because the UN classifications are having problems with it. So I think each paper could ask itself the question, how sensitive are my conclusions to these data problems, rather than say, well, there are problems, we know all that, or even simply listing the data problems and then say, well, we've got to continue as though the data are okay. My final sort of suggestion, and this is sort of you can take it or leave it, is disciplines other than economics have of course worked on urbanization. I'm not suggesting that we jump into this pool that this project will start swimming around in this, but maybe a dip into this might be helpful. Particularly, I think for the overview paper, it might be helpful to do this. I can take just one example of this. The ethnic composition of cities is something that non-economists worry a lot about. Okay? Paul knows this in the discussion that we had in the conference that Paul was at. Okay? They think a lot about it. We think a lot about different ethnicities living close to each other and all the conflict that can arise, cooperation, etc. All those things. But this is tended not to feature, as is clear from the papers in this conference, featured not strongly, if at all, in economist discussions. But in the OUP volume, you'll find some of these discussions from non-economists. Now the point is, we as economists, of course, do take into account ethnicity variables. We decompose poverty by ethnicity to present those sorts of figures. But just a very simple thing will be a cross tabulation of poverty by urban, rural, and by ethnicity. Okay. But are patterns of ethnic patterns of poverty different in urban areas than in rural areas? That is actually corresponds quite nicely to what we do in any event when we decompose by ethnicity. But the question wouldn't arise if you weren't thinking that ethnicity might be an important component of the urban media. Okay. So those are my suggestions for the project and for the paper. Thank you.